She'd never forget the champagne hitting her face. December 24th, 2023. Her mother-in-law threw it during the Christmas party, then shoved divorce papers into Helena's trembling hands, while 200 guests laughed. Her husband stood there, arm around his mistress, smiling. She signed those papers with champagne dripping from her chin. None of them knew she was Helena Okonkwo, and billionaire Tobias Mensah had been searching for her across 2 continents for 3 years. This story will change how you see poverty and power. Stay with me. The Patterson mansion glittered with Christmas lights that December evening, every window blazing like a jewel box against the Atlanta skyline. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors, while a live orchestra played carols nobody listened to. 200 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits sipped vintage champagne and pretended not to notice the young woman in a gray maid's uniform refilling their glasses. Her name was Helena Okonkwo, though nobody at the party called her that. They called her the Help when they acknowledged her at all. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman they ignored had once been destined for something far greater than serving drinks at their celebration. Helena moved through the crowd like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the polished floors. At 28 years old, she should have been one of the guests celebrating, not the servant cleaning up their spills. Her dark eyes, which once sparkled with ambition and hope, now held only resignation. She'd learned over 3 brutal years of marriage to Andre Patterson that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every morning she woke up in the mansion's basement storage room that Claudette Patterson had assigned as her quarters. Every day she cooked meals she wasn't allowed to eat at the family table. Every night she cleaned rooms she'd never be welcomed into as anything other than staff. This was her life now, and tonight it was about to end in the most humiliating way possible. Claudette Patterson stood at the center of the ballroom holding court like a queen, her silver gown probably costing more than most people earned in a year. At 63, she carried herself with the rigid posture of old money and the cold eyes of someone who'd never been told no. She was Andre's mother, Helena's mother-in-law, and the woman who'd turned Helena's marriage into a living nightmare from the moment the wedding ended. Right now, Claudette was laughing with a circle of her wealthy friends, her manicured hand gesturing dramatically as she told some story that had them all cackling. Then her eyes landed on Helena across the room, and her expression shifted into something cruel and satisfied. She crooked one finger in a summoning gesture that made Helena's stomach drop. Helena approached slowly, the champagne bottle heavy in her hands. She knew that look on Claudette's face. It meant something bad was coming, something designed to humiliate and hurt. The circle of wealthy women parted slightly as Helena arrived, their conversation dying into expectant silence. Claudette reached out and snatched the champagne bottle from Helena's hands without a word of thanks. She poured herself a fresh glass, took a delicate sip, then smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a snake before it strikes. Without warning, Claudette threw the entire glass of champagne directly into Helena's face. The liquid hit like a cold slap, soaking her hair and dripping down her neck. The women around them gasped in mock shock, but they were smiling. This was entertainment to them. The champagne burned Helena's eyes as she stood there frozen, not daring to wipe her face. The ballroom conversation didn't stop. People barely glanced over before returning to their own discussions. This wasn't shocking to them. This was normal. Claudette treating Helena like dirt was so routine that it didn't even qualify as gossip anymore. Claudette reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, slapping it against Helena's wet chest hard enough to hurt. The envelope stuck there for a moment before falling to the floor with a wet smack. Helena looked down at it, then back up at her mother-in-law's triumphant face. She already knew what was inside. She'd been expecting this for months, dreading it and somehow hoping for it at the same time. "Pick it up," Claudette commanded, her voice carrying across the immediate area. Several more guests turned to watch now, sensing drama. Helena bent down slowly and retrieved the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out and notarized, just waiting for her signature. Claudette pulled out a pen from her handbag and held it out like a weapon. "Sign it, right here, right now, in front of everyone. Then take your pathetic belongings and get out of my house." The words hit harder than the champagne had. Helena's vision blurred, though she couldn't tell if it was from the alcohol in her eyes or the tears now mixing with it. She looked around desperately for André, her husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect her. She found him near the bar, his arm draped possessively around a woman in a red dress that probably cost more than Helena had ever owned in her entire life. Gabrielle Thomas was everything Helena wasn't: polished, connected, from the right family with the right background. She was André's mistress, though everyone pretended she was just his business associate. Right now, Gabrielle was laughing at something André whispered in her ear, her hand resting on her supposedly pregnant belly. Helena knew the pregnancy was fake. She'd accidentally found the padding and purchased ultrasound photos hidden in André's car 2 weeks ago. But nobody would believe her if she said anything. Nobody ever believed her. André looked over and met Helena's eyes across the crowded room. For just a second she thought she saw something, guilt, maybe, or regret. But then he smiled, raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast, and turned his back on her completely. That gesture broke something inside Helena that had been cracking for 3 years. She looked down at the divorce papers, at Claudette's pen being shoved into her hand, at the circle of wealthy guests now openly watching her humiliation, like it was dinner theater. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. She was getting nothing, no alimony, no settlement, not even her own clothes. She would leave with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage: nothing. Claudette had made sure of that. The papers stated that Helena admitted to being an unfit wife, agreed she'd contributed nothing to the marriage, and acknowledged she had no claim to any Patterson assets. It was a complete destruction of her dignity, legally documented, and Helena signed it. Her signature was shaky and smeared with champagne, but she signed every page. What choice did she have? The moment her signature hit the final page, Claudette snatched the papers away like they might contaminate her. She waved them in the air triumphantly, and several guests actually applauded. "Finally," Claudette announced loudly, "my son is free of this burden. This gold-digging nobody who trapped him into marriage can now go back to whatever gutter she crawled out of." The words washed over Helena like poison, but she didn't react. She'd learned not to react. Any response just gave them more ammunition, more reasons to hurt her. Instead, she turned and walked toward the service exit, champagne still dripping from her hair, leaving wet footprints on the expensive marble floors. Behind her, the party continued without missing a beat. The orchestra played, glasses clinked, people laughed. Her 3-year nightmare of a marriage ended not with a bang, but with champagne and casual cruelty. Helena made her way down to the basement storage room she'd called home for 2 years. The room was barely 8 feet by 10 feet, with a single narrow bed, a broken dresser, and a tiny bathroom that never quite got warm. This was where Claudette had moved her after the first year of marriage, claiming the guest rooms were needed for actual guests. Helena had a single black garbage bag for her belongings, because Claudette had thrown out her suitcases months ago, claiming they were cluttering the basement. Everything Helena owned in the world fit in that one bag: 3 changes of clothes, a photo of her parents, her mother's necklace, and a phone with a cracked screen. She changed out of the wet maid's uniform and into jeans and a sweater. both worn thin from years of use. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman she barely recognized anymore. Thin, exhausted, with eyes that had seen too much pain. She picked up her phone and stared at the home screen. 47% battery. $0 in her bank account. Claudette had convinced Andre to close their joint account 6 months ago, and Helena had never had access to open her own. No credit cards, no savings, no safety net. She had exactly $3.62 in her pocket from tips she'd hidden from cleaning other people's houses on her rare days off. It was December 24th, nearly midnight, freezing rain outside, and she had nowhere to go. The women's shelter she'd researched was 40 minutes away by bus, and buses weren't running this late on Christmas Eve. Helena sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry properly for the first time in months. Not the silent tears she'd learned to hide, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. When the tears finally stopped, Helena wiped her face and did something she'd been too afraid to do for 3 years. She opened her phone's contact list and scrolled past the handful of numbers, Andre's, Claudette's, a few service providers. Then she found it, buried at the bottom of the list where she'd hidden it so she wouldn't be tempted to use it, a contact labeled simply TM. Her thumb hovered over the name for a long moment. It was probably disconnected by now. 3 years was an eternity. He'd probably changed his number, moved on, forgotten all about the girl he'd spent one perfect summer with. But what did she have to lose? Helena took a deep breath and pressed the call button before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang once, twice. She was about to hang up when the line connected, and a voice she'd heard in her dreams for 3 years said, "Helena?" The sound of Tobias Mentz's voice saying her name shattered her completely. She tried to speak, but couldn't form words. All that came out was a choked sob. "Helena, is that you?" His voice was urgent now, worried. "Please, baby, talk to me. Where are you?" She'd forgotten how he used to call her baby, how his Nigerian accent softened on certain words, how safe his voice made her feel. She managed to choke out, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called. She couldn't finish. 3 years of holding everything inside came pouring out in broken gasps and tears. Tobias didn't rush her. She could hear him moving, heard background noise like he was in an airport or hotel. "Breathe," he said gently. "Just breathe for me. I'm here. I've got you." And somehow, across whatever distance separated them, she felt it. She wasn't alone anymore. "Where are you?" Tobias asked again, and this time Helena managed to answer. "Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta." There was a pause, and she heard him talking to someone else, his hand probably covering the phone. When he came back, his voice was firm and certain. "I'm in Chicago right now, but I'm getting on a plane. I'll be there in 3 hours. Can you tell me exactly where you are?" Helena looked around the tiny basement room, at the concrete walls and single light bulb. She couldn't tell him this, couldn't let him see what she'd become. "I can't, Tobias, it's been 3 years. You don't have to." He cut her off. "Helena Okonkwo, I have been looking for you for 3 years. I've had investigators searching 2 continents. I've never stopped. So please, please tell me where you are so I can come get you." The raw emotion in his voice made her start crying again. She gave him the address, heard him relay it to someone, heard urgent commands being given. "I need you to do something for me," Tobias said. "I need you to leave that address and go somewhere public. A coffee shop, a gas station, anywhere with people and lights. Can you do that?" Helena understood what he wasn't saying. He thought she might be in danger. And maybe she was. Maybe Claudette's cruelty could escalate now that the divorce was signed. "There's a bus stop 2 blocks away," Helena said quietly. "It has a shelter and lights." She could practically hear Tobias nodding. "Perfect, go there now. My security team is tracking your phone. Yes, I know how that sounds, but I've been ready to find you for 3 years, so I have systems in place. They'll reach you before I do, but I'm coming, Helena. I promise I'm coming." She wanted to ask why he'd searched for her, why he still cared after she'd disappeared without explanation. But her phone battery was dropping fast, and she needed to move. Helena grabbed her garbage bag of belongings and climbed the basement stairs for the last time. She could still hear the party upstairs, still hear music and laughter. She slipped out the service door into freezing rain and started walking. The bus stop was exactly where she remembered, a small covered shelter with a single bench and a light that flickered but worked. She sat down on the wet bench, hugged her bag to her chest, and waited. The rain was coming down harder now, icy and relentless. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Helena checked her phone. 32% battery. She sent Tobias a text with her exact location, watched it deliver, then put the phone in her pocket to conserve power. And she waited. Time moved strangely when you were sitting in the rain at a bus stop on Christmas Eve, with your entire life in a garbage bag. Helena watched the minutes tick by on the flickering digital display. 12:15 a.m., 12:30, 12:45. Her phone died at 1:07 a.m., the screen going black with no warning. She was completely alone now, unable to call for help, unable to know if Tobias was really coming or if this was just another dream that would crumble when she woke up. A bus driver pulled up around 1:30, opening the doors and looking at her with concern. "You need a ride, miss. It's too cold to be out here." Helena shook her head. "I'm waiting for someone." The driver looked doubtful but didn't press. "Merry Christmas," he offered before driving away. Helena sat in the rain and waited. At 2:47 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up to the bus stop so fast their tires screeched. Helena's heart jumped. For a terrified second she thought Claudette had sent people to hurt her. But then the back door of the middle vehicle opened and Tobias Mensah stepped out into the rain. He looked exactly as she remembered and completely different at the same time. Taller somehow, or maybe she'd just been around people who made her feel small for too long. He wore an expensive suit that was getting soaked, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His eyes scanned the bus stop desperately until they landed on her, and his entire face transformed with relief and anguish. He crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides, shrugged off his suit jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could speak. Then he pulled her into his arms, and Helena forgot how to breathe. "I've got you now," Tobias said into her wet hair. "You're safe. I've got you." Helena had held herself together through 3 years of abuse, through the champagne and the divorce papers and the walk in the freezing rain. But being held by someone who actually cared if she lived or died, that broke her. She collapsed against his chest and sobbed while he lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. He carried her to the SUV, set her gently in the back seat, and climbed in beside her. The door closed, shutting out the rain and cold. The interior was warm and dry and smelled like leather and his cologne. Someone handed him a blanket and he wrapped it around her. Someone else passed him a bottle of water. Tobias opened it and held it to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed gently. Helena obeyed, her hands shaking too much to hold the bottle herself. The convoy drove to the Four Seasons, where Tobias apparently had the entire top-floor penthouse suite reserved. Helena learned later that he'd been keeping a suite on standby in 5 major cities for 3 years, just in case he found her. The suite was bigger than the entire Patterson Mansion basement. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Atlanta skyline glittering in the rain. A doctor was waiting, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Neka Adeyemi, who examined Helena with gentle efficiency. Moderate hypothermia, she announced. Malnutrition, dehydration, and bruises in various stages of healing. You've been through hell. It wasn't a question. She started an IV drip and gave instructions to Tobias about keeping Helena warm and hydrated. Then she left them alone, and Tobias pulled a chair up beside the bed, where Helena sat wrapped in heated blankets. "Tell me everything," Tobias said quietly. So Helena did. She told him about her father, Leopold Okonkwo, dying when she was 16, about her Uncle Thomas stealing the inheritance, about fleeing to a rural village with her mother. She told him about her mother's death 2 years later, about working 3 jobs to put herself through university, about the summer she met him at that tech conference in Lagos. "I was so happy," she whispered. "Those 3 months with you were the happiest I'd ever been, but then my scholarship funding fell through and I had to leave school. I went back to the village to work and I had no way to contact you. I had no phone, no internet access. I was so ashamed of what I'd become, poor and desperate and scared. I couldn't let you see me like that." Tobias's jaw was tight as he listened. His hands clenched on his knees. Helena told him about meeting Andre 6 months later, about how he'd seemed kind at first, how he'd promised security and family. "I was so alone," she said, her voice breaking. "My mother was gone, I had no one, and he seemed nice. He took me to dinner, said all the right things. I thought maybe I could be happy again, even if it wasn't the same as what we had." She told him about the wedding, about how Claudette's true nature had appeared the moment the ceremony ended, about being given a maid's uniform on her wedding night, about 3 years of cooking meals she wasn't allowed to eat, cleaning rooms she wasn't allowed to enter, being treated like something less than human. She told him about Andre's affair with Gabrielle, about the fake pregnancy, about tonight's final humiliation. By the time she finished, Tobias's hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. "They will answer for this," Tobias said, his voice cold and hard. "Every single one of them. I promise you, Helena, they will pay for what they did to you." But Helena shook her head weakly. "I just want to be free of them. The divorce is signed. I never have to see them again. That's enough." Tobias looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever seen. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known," he said quietly, "but you deserve justice, not just freedom. And whether you want it or not, it's coming for them." He stood up and made a phone call, stepping out onto the suite's balcony so she couldn't hear. Through the glass, she could see him pacing, gesturing sharply, his face hard. He was on the phone for 20 minutes. When he came back inside, his expression was gentler but determined. Over the next 3 days, while Helena recovered in the suite, Tobias's team worked. She learned he'd built a technology empire worth $8 billion in the 3 years since she'd disappeared. He'd created software that revolutionized supply chain management across Africa and Europe. He was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the world, featured on magazine covers and invited to speak at global conferences. But when Helena expressed amazement at what he'd accomplished, he just shrugged. "None of it mattered," he said simply. "I built all of it hoping it would somehow help me find you. Money opens doors. I needed every door on 2 continents opened." He'd never married, never even dated seriously. "How could I?" he asked. "I knew you were out there somewhere. I just had to find you." His team of forensic accountants and private investigators discovered things Helena never could have imagined. The Patterson family was completely bankrupt, had been for years. They were living on credit and loans, using their old money reputation to maintain access to society while drowning in debt. The mansion was mortgaged 3 times over and about to be foreclosed. Andre had embezzled from his own company to pay for Gabrielle's designer wardrobe and jewelry. Claudette's famous jewelry collection was mostly rentals and fakes. Gabrielle's pregnancy was indeed fake. The investigators found receipts for pregnancy padding and payments to a medical technician who'd created false ultrasounds. The whole family was a house of cards held together by lies and Helena's unpaid labor. But that wasn't even the most shocking discovery. Tobias's investigators had looked into Helena's background to build a case against the Pattersons. What they found changed everything. Uncle Thomas Okonkwo had never legally inherited Leopold's estate. He'd bribed lawyers and hidden the original will, but he'd never actually completed the legal transfer. The original will was still valid, filed in Lagos probate court, and it left everything to Leopold's only daughter, Helena. The mining company her father had built hadn't just survived, it had thrived. New mineral deposits had been discovered. International contracts had been secured. The company was now worth $2.1 billion, and legally every cent of it belonged to Helena. She was one of the wealthiest women in Africa and didn't even know it. When Tobias showed her the documents, Helena couldn't process it. She stared at bank statements with balances that had so many zeros they didn't look real. She looked at her father's will, at his signature, at the clause that said everything goes to my beloved daughter, Helena Adana Okonkwo. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's real," Tobias assured her. "My lawyers verified it 6 different ways. Your uncle died of a heart attack 2 days ago when investigators showed up at his house with the original will. He had no legal heirs. Everything defaults to you immediately. On December 31st, it all becomes officially yours." Helena's hands shook as she held the papers. 5 days ago, she'd had $3.62. In 3 more days, she'd have billions. The number was so absurd she almost laughed. Except none of it felt real. What felt real was the champagne hitting her face. What felt real was Claudette's cruelty and André's betrayal. Tobias sat beside her and took her hands gently. "I know this is overwhelming, but Helena, this is your father's legacy. He built this company for you, and now you get to decide what to do with it." She looked at him, this man who'd searched for her for 3 years, who'd dropped everything to fly to her in the middle of the night, who was offering help without asking for anything in return. "What would you do?" she asked. Tobias considered carefully before answering. "I would take back everything they tried to steal from you. Not just the money, but your dignity, your power, your voice. I would let the world see who you really are, and I would let them face the natural consequences of their actions." He paused. "But that's me." "What do you want, Helena?" She thought about it for a long time. What did she want? "I want them to know," Helena said finally. "I want them to see me and know exactly what they threw away. Not for revenge. I don't need revenge, but for closure. I need to face them one more time, not as their victim, but as myself." Tobias smiled. "Then that's what we'll do." They learned the Pattersons were hosting another party on New Year's Eve, a desperate attempt to maintain appearances, even as their world crumbled. The videos of Helena's Christmas Eve humiliation had gone viral. The media had picked up the story. Public opinion had turned viciously against the Pattersons, though they didn't know yet about Helena's inheritance. Tobias suggested they attend the New Year's party, not to make a scene, not to gloat, but simply to let Helena face them on her own terms. She agreed. The next few days were surreal. Helena met with lawyers and accountants who explained her father's business. She met company executives who remembered her as a little girl, visiting the mines with her father. They were thrilled the legitimate heir had returned. They showed her how the company had grown, the communities it employed, the ethical practices they'd maintained in her father's name. Helena realized her inheritance wasn't just money. It was legacy and responsibility. She started learning the business with the same fierce intelligence that had earned her a university scholarship. Tobias watched her transform, not physically but internally. The broken, defeated woman from the bus stop was being replaced by someone stronger, someone who remembered who she'd been before the world tried to crush her. Helena and Tobias spent hours talking, rebuilding what they'd lost. She learned he'd searched everywhere for her, hired investigators, called every university in Nigeria, tracked down everyone who'd attended that tech conference where they met. He'd found nothing because she'd essentially disappeared into a rural village with no digital footprint. "I knew you wouldn't just abandon me without reason," he told her. "I knew something had to be wrong, so I kept looking." The romance between them rekindled slowly, naturally, not rushed by drama or circumstance, but rebuilt on the foundation of genuine connection they'd discovered 3 years ago. Tobias made it clear he had no expectations, that helping her was enough. But Helena found herself falling for him all over again, this time without fear or shame. This time she knew her worth. On December 30th, news broke that Helena Okonkwo had inherited the Okonkwo Mining Corporation, worth over $2 billion. The media exploded. The connection to the viral Christmas party video was made immediately. "Humiliated Maid was secret billionaire heiress" became the headline on every news site. The videos of Claudette throwing champagne in Helena's face were replayed endlessly, now with the added context of Helena's wealth. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. The Pattersons became the most hated family in America. Overnight, Andre lost his job when his embezzlement was discovered. Gabrielle was exposed for the fake pregnancy. Someone leaked the receipts and false ultrasounds. Claudette's entire social circle abandoned her. They'd already lost the mansion to foreclosure. Now they lost their reputations too, and Helena hadn't even done anything. The truth had simply come to light. The Patterson family panicked. Claudette tried calling Helena dozens of times. Andre showed up at Tobias's hotel and was removed by security. Gabrielle posted a tearful apology video that was ratioed so badly she deleted all her social media accounts. They were hemorrhaging money and dignity by the hour. The New Year's Eve party they'd planned became their last desperate grasp at relevance. They sold everything they had left to rent a venue, hire cheap catering, and maintain the illusion of status for one more night. Maybe 30 people RSVP'd, most out of morbid curiosity. But the Pattersons sent out invitations anyway, clinging to the fantasy that they still mattered. Helena received an invitation too, probably sent before they realized who she was. She and Tobias decided to attend, not for spectacle, but for closure. December 31st, 2023. Helena stood in front of the mirror in Tobias's hotel suite and barely recognized herself. Not because she'd changed physically, she wore a simple black dress, her mother's necklace, minimal makeup. But her eyes were different. They held strength instead of resignation. She looked like herself again, like the woman she'd been before the Pattersons tried to break her. Tobias appeared behind her in the mirror, devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "We can skip the party. You never have to see them again." Helena shook her head. "I need to. Not for them. For me. I need to close this chapter." He nodded and offered his arm. They left the hotel at 11 p.m., arriving at the party venue an hour before midnight. The venue was trying desperately to look elegant but failing. Budget decorations, cheap champagne, a DJ instead of a live orchestra. About 30 guests stood around in awkward clusters, clearly aware they were attending a social disaster. The Pattersons stood near the center, Claudette in a dress that was probably rented, Andre nervous and sweating, Gabrielle noticeably without her pregnancy padding and looking diminished. They were laughing too loud, trying too hard, and everyone could see through it. Then Helena and Tobias walked in, and the room went silent. Actually silent. The DJ's music cut off mid-song. Conversations died. Every eye turned to the entrance, where Helena stood in her simple black dress, radiating quiet power with one of the world's richest men at her side. Claudette's face went from fake cheer to genuine shock to undisguised panic in 3 seconds. André froze mid-laugh, his champagne glass hanging forgotten in his hand. Gabrielle actually took a step backward like Helena might attack her, but Helena didn't do anything dramatic. She simply walked forward, her heels clicking on the cheap tile floor, until she stood in the center of the room. Tobias stayed 2 steps behind her, present and supportive, but letting this be her moment. Helena looked around at the faces staring at her. Some showed shame, some showed curiosity, some showed the same cruelty they'd displayed when she was powerless. She didn't care anymore what they thought. She took a breath and spoke, her voice clear and calm. "I came here tonight to say thank you." The confusion that rippled through the room was almost funny. Claudette's mouth fell open. André looked at Gabrielle like she might have an explanation. Helena continued, her voice steady. "You showed me what I was accepting. You taught me my worth by showing me yours. You spent 3 years thinking I deserved the way you treated me, that I was lucky you'd married me, that I should be grateful for a roof over my head, even if it was a basement storage room. That champagne on Christmas Eve washed away the last of my doubt." She turned specifically to André, and he actually flinched. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said without anger. "I hope you figure out who you want to be." She turned to Claudette. "I hope you find peace with who you are." Then to Gabrielle, "And I hope you find truth." The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. "I forgive you," Helena said, and meant it. "Not for you, but for me, because I refuse to carry your cruelty any longer. It's yours. You earned it. You keep it." She didn't mention her billions, didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Helena turned and walked back toward the exit, toward Tobias, toward her future. She heard someone start crying. Claudette, probably. Heard André say something she didn't bother listening to. None of it mattered anymore. She and Tobias left the party at 11:40, 20 minutes before midnight. They drove to a quiet spot overlooking the Atlanta skyline and watched fireworks explode across the sky as 2024 began. Helena leaned against Tobias's chest, his arms wrapped around her, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years: peace. The next 6 months transformed Helena's life completely. She took control of a Conquo mining corporation and immediately implemented her vision. Fair wages for all employees tripled. Ethical mining practices enforced across every operation. Community investment programs in areas surrounding the mines. She hired hundreds of people from rural villages, like the one where she'd once struggled to survive. The company's profits increased by 340%, because turns out when you treat workers with dignity and pay them fairly, they work harder and stay longer. Employee satisfaction hit record highs. Helena became known not just as an heiress, but as an innovator who was changing an entire industry. She gave interviews where she spoke honestly about abuse and survival, inspiring thousands of people trapped in situations like hers had been. Tobias and Helena became official partners in both business and life. They merged some of their operations, creating jobs and opportunities across 2 continents. They got engaged in June, but decided to take their time with wedding planning. Both agreed they wanted to build their relationship on solid ground, not rush into anything out of drama or emotion. The engagement was quiet, private, just the 2 of them on the anniversary of the day they'd first met. Helena wore her mother's necklace and Tobias's ring and felt happy in a way she'd forgotten was possible. They split time between Lagos and Atlanta, building a life that honored both their backgrounds and their shared future. As for the Pattersons, Claudette ended up working retail at a department store, humbled by reality in ways she'd never imagined possible. Andre went to therapy and, according to mutual acquaintances, was genuinely trying to face what he'd done and become a better person. Gabrielle disappeared from social media entirely and was reportedly living quietly in another state. All three of them sent apology letters to Helena over the months following New Year's. She never responded. She didn't need to. She forwarded them to her therapist, processed what she needed to process, and moved on. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It meant releasing the weight of their actions and choosing her own peace. She heard through the grapevine that Claudette had framed her letter when Helena didn't respond. Some small dignity in the fact that Helena had at least read it. Helena didn't confirm or deny. Some things weren't her problem anymore. In June, 6 months after that Christmas Eve nightmare, Helena visited her parents' graves in Lagos. She brought flowers and sat between the headstones while Tobias waited by the car at a respectful distance. "I found my way back, Mama," Helena said quietly, touching her mother's name carved in marble. "I reclaimed everything Uncle Thomas stole. Papa's company is thriving. I'm treating people the way you both taught me, with dignity and fairness. And I found Tobias again. You would have loved him." She sat there for a long time, telling them about the business, about the changes she was making, about her plans for the future. "I won't pretend the last few years didn't happen," she said finally. "They shaped me. They taught me what I'm capable of surviving, but they don't define me anymore." She stood, brushed dirt from her dress, and walked back to where Tobias waited. They drove toward the sunset, the Lagos skyline glowing gold and orange in the distance. Helena watched the city pass by and thought about everything that had brought her here. The champagne hitting her face, the divorce papers signed with shaking hands, the bus stop in freezing rain, Tobias's voice on the phone saying he'd been searching for 3 years, the moment she learned she'd inherited billions, and the moment she realized money was just a tool. What mattered was how you used it. She thought about Claudette's cruelty and Andre's betrayal and how both had accidentally set her free. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the door to your best life. Not because the pain was good, but because surviving it teaches you who you really are. Helena Okonkwo never forgot the champagne hitting her face on Christmas Eve 2023, but she also never forgot who she was beneath it. The Pattersons had taken 3 years of her life through manipulation and abuse. She'd taken back her entire future through resilience and grace. That champagne had felt like humiliation in the moment, like the final proof she was worthless. But looking back now, Helena saw it differently. It was baptism. It washed away the woman they'd tried to make her and revealed the woman she'd always been underneath. Strong, capable, worthy, and free. The person throwing the champagne had meant to destroy her. Instead, they'd accidentally set her free, and Helena had walked through that door into a life beyond anything she'd imagined possible. This is Helena's story, a reminder that humiliation is not your destination. It's your turning point. The people who underestimate you are writing your comeback story without even knowing it. Sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the first day of your real life beginning. Helena signed those divorce papers with champagne dripping from her chin and tears in her eyes. 6 months later, she was running a billion-dollar empire, engaged to the love of her life, and helping thousands of people build better lives. Not through revenge, but through becoming exactly who she was meant to be all along. The Pattersons thought they were destroying her that Christmas Eve. They were actually witnessing the birth of someone extraordinary. They just didn't know it yet. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe, because we bring you more stories of people who turned their pain into power, their humiliation into elevation, their breaking point into their breakthrough. Drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in Helena's position? Would you have shown grace like she did, or would you have chosen revenge? Would you have forgiven, or would you have made them pay? There's no wrong answer. Everyone's journey through pain is different. But Helena's choice to forgive, not for them, but for herself, freed her in ways revenge never could. That's the real power move. Not making them suffer, but refusing to let their suffering matter to you anymore. See you in the next one. And remember, they can destroy your circumstances. They can take your money and your home and your dignity. But they cannot take who you really are unless you let them. Helena didn't let them, and that made all the difference.